I'm Adam. I have a PhD in atmospheric physics, and I'm here to help you make sense of the changing planet we all share. And I've been avoiding making this video for years. You see, there's actually been some progress on climate action. This is good news for anyone living on this planet, which most likely includes you. But the problem is the narrative around this good news has been distorted in an attempt to label climate science a scam, a cheat, and alarmism. And yes, that last quote is from President Donald Trump. So let's get into it. Let's talk about RCP 8.5. And with that name, RCP 8.5, you can already maybe start to see why this is something I didn't really want to cover. This is really in the weeds, specific, nerdy stuff. Ultimately, it's about how climate scientists imagine different possible futures. I figured that the debate over it, while certainly important for researchers, is of pretty limited relevance to the rest of us. But then, just a few days ago, President Donald Trump tweeted about it. And so I figured this would be a good chance to discuss how science is done and how that process gets misrepresented. Okay, so to understand what the future of our climate might look like, scientists use computer models. These simulate physical and natural processes to investigate how the Earth might react to what we do with burning fossil fuels and emitting greenhouse gases. But that begs the question, what will we do with burning fossil fuels and emitting greenhouse gases? Now, obviously, no scientist can answer that. Maybe we'll keep emitting more and more. Maybe we'll see the error of our ways and aggressively cut emissions and even find ways to suck emissions back up. And maybe, most likely in fact, we'll do some middle ground between these two future worlds. And so climate scientists simulate a range of different future worlds, each with different assumptions on what we humans might decide to do. I'd describe these as ranging from the nihilistically pessimistic to the blindly optimistic. One set of scenarios was proposed for simulations way back around 2007, and one of these scenarios, RCP 8.5, was the bleakest possible. It imagined a world where emissions kept rising steeply for most of this century, only levelling off around 2100. Now, to stop the world heating, we need to stop emitting carbon dioxide entirely. So, in this scenario, not only would the world already be scorching hot by the end of this century, but it would still be getting hotter. Fast. And this would mean skyrocketing sea level rise, inundating coasts around the world, vast swathes of the planet made uninhabitably hot, ecosystems collapsing, farming systems failing. In summary, the world RCP 8.5 described was bad. It was really bad. Now, scenarios like these aren't predictions of what will happen. Each scenario is a possibility worth studying. As the 2010 paper introducing the scenarios put it, they are neither forecasts nor policy recommendations, but were chosen to map a broad range of climate outcomes. Even so, when I started working on my PhD in 2011, RCP 8.5 still seemed fairly plausible. The world's emissions were rising at breakneck speeds. Coal, the most polluting major fuel source, was growing, especially in China, where it almost seemed doomed to rise indefinitely. And indeed, for the first few years after the scenarios were put forward, global emissions actually rose even faster than they did in this worst case scenario of RCP 8.5, which I remember seeing at the time and just finding incredibly depressing. I mean, the world was doing worse than the worst case scenario. As a result, climate scientists often referred to RCP 8.5 as business as usual, since that's what it seemed to be, a continuation of the terrible way we were doing things. After all, this was before the Paris Agreement, a time when most conversations about climate change were about whether it even existed. There wasn't much reason to expect any kind of climate action, but I'm pleased to report a lot has happened since then. Countries across the globe are planning their paths to net zero, seriously investigating how to stop burning fossil fuels and emitting greenhouse gases. Renewables have become staggeringly cheap and are being deployed at vast scales across the world. Other tech, from electric vehicles to battery storage, are rapidly maturing, helping drive the transition even further. While emissions used to relentlessly rise, they have begun, finally, to flatline. Clean tech is even driving a decline in emissions from the power sector. Coal growth is stalling, and all of this has shifted things away from the worst-case scenario that RCP 8.5 outlined. What we thought could be a potential future is no longer plausible. Climate scientists are currently updating the future scenarios to use in the next round of simulations, and the proposal is that the new worst-case scenario won't have such extreme emissions as those described by RCP 8.5. Now, before we get on to why climate deniers are furious about this, I just want to say that it is in fact good news. No, we're nowhere near on track to limit heating to our relatively safe limits. We're still heading for devastating consequences, from islands inundated by sea level rise to ever more intense and frequent extreme weather disasters, from heat waves to droughts to downpours. But despite this, we have shifted away from what was the worst case scenario. When I started working on climate change, RCP 8.5 genuinely seemed possible. I'd say that many scientists even feared that it was probable. Maybe with hindsight we could say that that was naively pessimistic, but there wasn't much cause for optimism about climate action back then. And now, in the decade or so since, we've got to a place where it's no longer useful to continue thinking about this scenario. Put succinctly, we have actually made progress on climate change. Some progress at least. Now, if you've got to this point in the video and you're thinking, how could this possibly lead to an angry tweet from the President of the United States? Well, yeah, we're in the same boat. So let's talk about why people are furious about all this, or at least why they're saying they're furious. I can't tell whether it's all just play acting at this point. The claim is that because climate scientists studied RCP 8.5 so much, but now understand it's unrealistic, that must mean they were somehow doing misleading research, even though, just to reiterate, it only became unrealistic because climate action exceeded expectations. I've seen claims that 8.5 is a scam, a cheat, predictions have been rubbished. Funnily enough, so many of these pieces later go on to undermine their fury by acknowledging that the scenarios aren't predictions, and the reason 8.5 has been chucked out is because of unexpected progress, not some climate conspiracy. Oh, quick note that whenever I make videos like this, I get comments accusing me of being a part of this mysterious conspiracy, brought out by someone or other. And so, disclaimer, videos like this one are funded entirely by climates like you. I don't sell you rubbish you don't need with ads or with product placements. And if you're into that, you can help me keep doing it by heading up here. Now, it's hard to know what to say about all this RCP 8.5 hype. The reason RCP 8.5 is no longer likely is because of all the progress away from fossil fuels. But the people who are crying wolf about this are exactly the people who want us to stay hooked on fossil fuels. Like in his tweet about this, President Donald Trump literally uses the progress as an argument against making progress, arguing against energy policies and research and what he so creatively calls the Green New Scam from the Democrats. Say what you want about Donald Trump, but he really knows how to craft a sick burn. Now, I do think, looking back, scientists could have communicated RCP 8.5 more clearly. Talking about it as a business-as-usual scenario wasn't the best choice of words. Sure, at the time it did, at least to me, seem like that's where business was taking us, but using that language to refer to it bakes in a whole host of assumptions. Worst case scenario would probably have been more accurate. A lot of research and headlines also focused on this scenario. I don't think that that's a bad thing. It's important to consider the worst possible scenario, especially for something as important as the future of our planet. It was just important to make clear that that's what we were doing. And as coal use and emissions also started to shift away from RCP 8.5, the emphasis on this scenario should also have shifted away. But the idea that scientists were somehow misleading people by even considering this scenario that just followed where things had been headed, yeah, I'm struggling to follow the logic on that. And this is why I thought it was worthwhile to make this video, to explain a little bit about how climate science works, how we have, in fact, made a chunk of progress, and to point out that no matter what happens, climate deniers like the President of the United States will twist and manipulate it into an argument to stop climate action, even when the actual story is that climate action did what it was meant to. It worked to shift us away from what was once the worst case scenario. Now, while we're talking about unrealistic scenarios, it's important to talk about the other end of the spectrum, the scenarios that climate scientists have considered, which see emissions aggressively cut and even huge amounts of CO2 being sucked out of the air. Scenarios, for example, to bring heating under 1.5 degrees Celsius. By the way, I've got a video coming up on whether we can actually revive 1.5. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and while you're clicking on things, a like and a comment are pretty good too. These far more optimistic scenarios have, in many ways, a far looser connection with reality than RCP 8.5 ever did. That's because we don't even know how they could take place. To this date, we don't have any kind of tech that could plausibly suck up CO2 at scale. Now, again, these scenarios are still worth considering and studying, but we have to bear in mind that they're deeply unrealistic, and in many cases, now completely out of the question. But, and you're going to be shocked to hear this, I've not seen the climate denier crowd decrying the lack of realism in these simulations. I guess if they did that, they'd have to talk about how woefully inadequate climate action has been, how we're blowing past the safe limits the world agreed, and how the heating we're heading for threatens to wipe out vulnerable countries and ecosystems and destabilize both the human and natural worlds. Still, maybe someday we'll see Trump tweeting about how the Democrats have failed to take sufficient climate action and how the role of wind and solar needs to be huge. #sad. But for now, Trump is sticking to spreading climate misinformation on the international stage. Okay, until next time. Bye. RCP 8.5, RCP 8.5, why is that so hard to say?